Do we need to start the recording? We have started the recording.
It looks like Dr. Junkins is just signing on here.
Oh, okay, perfect. There's Ed.
Yeah, sorry about that. I was having some technical issues getting in.
Okay, we hear you loud and clear, so that's great. Well, wonderful. Welcome everyone to the first meeting of the Intermediate Strategies Work Group. It's a wonderful sunny Friday afternoon, and hopefully we'll really appreciate everybody taking the time to be a part of this. I think today is really an introductory meeting. And what we're going to try and do is really make this conversational. Our goal today is a couple. One, want to just be clear that we're all on the same page about our charge and our deliverables. And so to spend a bit of time on that. And then I think to talk about what criteria we might propose to evaluate proposals for coverage around. So spend that will, I think, help us, with a clear sense of our charge, as well as and great, thanks for pulling that up there. With a clear sense of our charge, we'll have then be able to put together a way to evaluate any proposals, which we'll look at today, some of the proposals in front of the legislature, but at future meetings, we'll start to talk about our own ideas and proposals, but we'll be able to really ground them in the criteria that we developed today. And then we'll talk about next steps. So how does that sound for an agenda?
Great.
Okay, I'm gonna leave it to people to, either raise their hand or just chime in. We're a small and informal group, so feel free to just chime in at any point. So let's get started with the charge and deliverables. Laurel had put together the sort of charge as outlined by Senator Manning in his letter. Great. And, as you can see, we're a small group. We're all here today, led by Ed and I, to identify intermediate strategies the legislature may consider to promote affordable universal coverage that will be, and I think this is key, consistent with and form a bridge to the task force's long-term overall plan. So come up with some intermediate strategies that are consistent with the overall plan. Assess and prioritize policies in preparation for the 2022 leg session. Policies which Oregon lawmakers can act upon, again, are consistent with the goals of the task force that continue to build on Oregon's history of innovation, and that we're to include these policy options in the report that's prepared by the task force in June, or with an extension that would be in next January, February. So let me stop there and get people's thoughts on the clarity of the charge, anything anybody has any concerns about, and or anything that anyone wants to consider modifying and adding to the charge.
Sounds good to me.
So I have a bit of a question. So this is like, if you can't get all the way there, this is sort of the partial step that you might take in sort of anticipation of at some later point getting all the way there. Is that the deal?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
No, I think, I guess I'd frame it as being consistent with the, the long-term overall goals of the task force. And that would get us, would move us forward in that direction. Won't, you're correct. Won't get us all the way there, but will get us partway there.
Yeah. So I'm seeing it as it's not, I've said we're going to have this, we can have this plan that will require federal approvals and congressional action and all that. And then we can have a plan that is doable without all those most of those major hurdles. And this is sort of a lead up to that. This one would help get us closer to that.
Yeah, that's
So
how
it's-
I've seen it, taking in directly the Medicare issue that may be clearly pose certain difficulties. And so being able to develop a plan that perhaps didn't include Medicare, et cetera. Ed, I think you're on mute.
There we go. Okay. So I look at this maybe a little bit differently, although not all that inconsistent with what I'm seeing, what I'm hearing. There are policies, there are bills that are in play. There are movements and groups that are working on pieces of what we are talking about right now. And I see this as a logical way for a group of us that are very much embedded in the ultimate prize, which is the 770 work, the plan, a group of us to look very carefully at what else, well, all the other moving parts that are trying to shore up healthcare delivery, healthcare access for those people immediately. I've looked through the bills pretty closely, the ones that are being proposed, and these are bills and policies and actions that are trying to plug holes, whereas the 770 effort is a much bigger, much much further down the road. So I don't see this, Chuck, so much as well, if we can't have what we're trying to get because the waivers, this is the alternative. I see this as yeah, I see this as this is very much as part of the process, which is why I like the label as the intermediate steps tag group.
Right. No, that's what I meant too.
Well
Yeah,
said, Ed. Deborah.
yeah. So yeah, Ed, you channeled me. Yeah, because I'm monitoring a lot of them now. I'm on a couple of other work groups, and sometimes I feel like I've got multiple personalities being in, everything in for 770 plus all these other spaces. The pragmatism in me says that there's no way possible for us to just flip a switch and overnight go from what we have now to what we envision. And so if we're really being honest, we will need to ladder up. Now, that being said, the sort of contrarian in me who kind of knows my way around the legislature says, will we get stuck in this space, right? When folks feel like it's better than what we have, will folks then lose their appetite for something more robust and all encompassing, looking at the price tag? And so while I know we have to take this step, the rest of us will be continuing to push forward a plan that is going to do everything that 770 promised, and that we're going to have to, make sure we don't lose stakeholders, communities, patients along the way who might feel that somehow, this is a bait and switch, right? Because we said under 770, we were going after one thing, and they don't understand for the most part, and I don't know all of them. So again, I am certainly lumping everyone together, but the vast majority don't understand the financing or the politics or all of the other things. They just know it better. And so we will have to be sensitive to that as we inform them, because we can't do this and not also inform them that this is what we're doing and this is why we're doing it, so that they don't feel like somehow we too have been disingenuous in our motives.
I
Right.
think that's why we're calling it intermediate, not final steps.
I probably
To
have to
try-
say that about another 1,000,001 times for everybody to have heard it once.
Well, if that's what it takes, that's what we'll have to do. Other thoughts?
Yeah, Bruce. My sense was, and maybe I'm wrong, but I thought there was a little bit of, hey, there's a lot of things going on. And, which of those things do you all see consistent with where you're going? And that you'd be willing to throw your weight into versus, which ones are not. And I mean, my own sense is I guess this says the 2022 legislative session, but as you'll hear probably in my later comments, I mean, my sense is that opportunities are likely now or sooner than the 2022 legislative session to get the federal government to do anything creative. Those would be my comments.
John, I think I would agree with that, although I think the timing that we have is such that we may not finish meeting for the next couple of months, and that leaves the current legislative session over. It's there's a deadline already on bills. I think that's why the timing was 2022.
Yeah. The question is whether we could do something that would be significant in an interim way that would be ready to go.
Well, I hope we can push in that direction.
Yeah, John, I agree with you. There's, the timing of this and the bills that are in play are worth our attention. What I heard John say was us sort of sifting through the work that's being done. What is something that we as a group that knows the plan, knows the 770 plan, can sort of get behind and if not endorse, although I don't want to say that word out loud, I just did. But I want to, I want to be clear that this work is in parallel to the work which is going to be ongoing with the 770, work. And what better group than to have the 770 group also look at what's out there. Many, if not most of us, have looked at these bills and some of the work that's out there. And Deborah is actually part of this. These other groups. I think that it would be foolhardy for us to move forward as a 70-70 group without having a very deep dive into this other work. And I just wanted to say out loud that I don't want this to ultimately distract us from what we're trying to do in 770. And I want to convince viewers that that we still have our eyes on that, but our eyes are wide open along the way.
In regard to that last issue that you raised, I wonder, are we going to be briefing the rest of the 770 group about this so there isn't a sort of an underlying feeling that this is sort of collapsing against the agenda? And what I mean by that is make sure they understand that this isn't sort of giving up on the goals of the 770 objective, but it's being asked by the legislature to sort of tie it in. I just wouldn't want some people in the task force to be very disconcerted about this, or even members of the community that listen to this and think, oh, this is just the other was just a show, and this is really where it's going to end up. And anyway, you understand my point.
Great point. I think what we'll do is, and I made a note, is be certain if we should actually treat our work much like we've been treating the tags, with a report back to the task force.
Yeah,
I'd ask Sarah and Laurel just to make a note of that and build that into our future schedules.
Isn't this sort of, we just don't want to have missed opportunities. They're meeting. We don't have our plans together. And so these are some opportunities to sort of move the ball in our direction while they're in session.
no, I understand. I'm just want to make sure that everybody comes along as we go through this process.
Yeah, right.
Great point.
Yeah, the last thing we need is for the larger group to fracture because of this smaller cohort.
Yep.
So, so Bruce, as we are talking, I feel ironically that I mean, personally, I feel like we're moving away from a discussion of what this group is needing to deliver. Because I'm hearing things like responding to the work that's out there, responding to legislation. What does it look like? And what updates are we going to be putting before the task force? So, I'd like to see us maybe start to concentrate on what it is that we're actually going to do at the end of this work of this group.
I would put forth for discussion that we will, as a group, generate one or more series of policy proposals that would be intermediate steps. Not just simply to react to what's out there.
And would those be tied to the existing legislation that's out there? Is that the idea?
Tied to the existing 770 legislation, yes.
Well, but what about these other bills that are all sort of in process? Is it tied to any of those necessarily?
I think that's our work for today, Chad, is to
Okay.
develop some criteria and then to think about, look at those and have some discussion about whether or not those would be reasonable intermediary steps or not.
I see. Okay, thank
And I
you.
think for us, just more today for that to be informational, so we can get a sense of what some of the proposals are out there.
Yeah, I guess the way I would think about it is to almost frame in terms of how we've broken out and to first look at the goals of 770 and sort of align the bills that are out there in the current session under the tags. Like if in fact this would, refer to payment in any way or insurance in any way, if this would look at infrastructure or equity in any way, and then to look at them based on the tags that we've set aside and to see if they meet the ultimate or the best option currently that's on the table that may have some ability to get out of one chamber and get over to the next chamber with some level of success. That's what I would do. I wouldn't spend a lot of time on bills that didn't fit under sort of the framework we've already created. And I wouldn't spend time on bills simply because they've been introduced if they don't have a likelihood of getting to a second chamber in time.
Thanks, Deborah. Other thoughts?
I think should we start going through the bills? Is that the next step or?
No, next step is to talk about some criteria.
Okay, that's.
So let me open this up for, based on what we've just talked about, that the goal being to come up with some policy options. I think we've been, one clear criteria I think we've implicitly agreed to is that they be consistent with the end goals of our report and of the work of 770. What other criteria do people want to put forward?
Well, I think it maybe sort of refining your comment, Bruce, is, there's sort of a set of values that are underlying our work. And then there's also sort of content in terms of what the outcome is. And I think it should be consistent not only with the outcome content, but also with the underlying set of values that we've put forward.
Great.
So even though it's part of our values, could we just add a bullet that we will view these policy proposals through the lens of equity, diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
that resides in several places, I think, in
Yeah.
our work with.
Just to put a finer point on be consistent with end goals, just to sort of flip that. We certainly don't want any policy that we'd have to undo. In other words, when I look at this, I would take, just let me throw out an idea, something like, a policy proposal for a universal fee schedule. That would be something consistent with where we're going. We wouldn't have to undo that. Whereas, a policy to change how one certain sector of healthcare is paid might not be consistent with that end goal.
Those are good examples.
Other thoughts about criteria?
So I'm not sure how to phrase this. There's I think we're all aware there's going to be some issues that the task force hasn't decided yet. And there's probably, as of today, split opinion on. And so I just don't want us to sort of back a bill that would sort of set that one up to come down. That hasn't been decided by the task force. I don't want to get in the way of that decision of the task force by supporting some other bill. So I think your example was a good one.
I wonder if we want something that would be a criteria that it would kind of meet our objectives or some of our objectives and require lesser regulatory barriers, something that sort of alludes to doing something to avoid a Medicare waiver or something like that.
That makes sense.
Right. I mean, we've
maybe
talked.
Maybe not avoid, but maybe.
Maybe implementable in the absence of regulatory actions or something.
Exactly, because we might want to, take those regulatory actions further down the line.
Right.
So not that we want to avoid it, but that I'm going to look to Laurel to get the right words in there. I think we got your sentiment, Chad.
And in that regard, is there, and I'm not really as linked up with all of this sort of state legislative process, but is there also something we're trying to achieve that is sort of more achievable at the state level in the near term? I'm not really certain about that.
Yeah, and the public option is one of those examples, I think.
So maybe there's another bullet that, I'm reading the first bullet, be consistent with end goals. But maybe we can look at policies that would help us achieve the end goals, which is a different statement. So to view policies that that help facilitate the work towards the end goals of 770.
And also are not in conflict or contradiction to them.
Yeah,
And then it becomes consistent with the end goals.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to call out is that facilitation part. If it's something that really helps us move the needle, towards the 770 goal, I think that's something that we can consciously think about as we're going through these policies. I'm thinking about the policies, the 4 or 5 policies that Laurel had already attached. And I looked into them as, thinking about this meeting and, what was my frame of mind as I was looking through those.
I like the notion of it helps move us towards, not just being consistent with. Other
Yeah.
thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I might say, I'm kind of bothered by the language, don't want to have to undo later. I mean, frankly, I find it difficult to imagine anything that is consistent with what we're doing in 770, that if we did it, there wouldn't be a risk that it wouldn't be undone. On the other hand, as I listen to the conversation now, there are a lot of things that if we were enabled to put a feasibility process together, it would be a huge step. I mean, I think potentially anything related to Medicare, just putting together a feasibility plan with the help of Medicare. So you're not doing it, but you're trying to get it to a stage where Medicare would think about it. That would be quite an accomplishment.
Mhm.
So how could we phrase that?
So, Dr. Stana, would it be more like it's not contradicting, it's not, there may be things that need to be undone partially, but they still furthered the goals and were, requirements for sort of an intermediate step, but they wouldn't be contradictory to the notions and the goals of 770.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, well, yeah, for example, actually, one of the things I hear everybody talking about a global budget, including us. And I'm not sure everybody is talking about the same concept. In fact, I'm pretty sure they're not. And actually an effort to figure out what does everybody mean when they say global budget. Would be good for all of us, and probably doesn't require legislation.
Other thoughts?
I'm curious what people's thoughts are about the relationship between this work and external constituencies. Should the intent of this be a sort of bridge step for some of these other constituencies?
Not sure I understand what your question is.
Well, I'm thinking about employer groups, sort of partial or even provider groups or various groups for which this is a really big bridge to go all the way across, and there's somehow this would sort of bring them along somehow. I don't really know exactly.
Yeah, so sitting in several spaces with those groups, I don't think it's gonna bring them along. I think it will give them a heads up. It will give them notice. But yeah, I've been in several of those spaces where they're at least in those spaces, they're not conceding at all. And the folks who are trying to move the work towards either the single payer or something else has conceded, some ground and changed language trying to accommodate. And there's no movement on that other side of the table at all. There's just from week to week, a different legal argument or a different spin to ask a different question or the same question a different way. So I don't see any movement. They don't.
So Deborah, do you think it's sort of to have any comment about that is counterproductive in regard to our work then?
I think it would be useful to the extent that we do want to say that we let them know. I think we need to create the problem, and the we is whoever is being determined to be this intermediary group. But I think trying to draw them into this process will stall it, and we'll try to delay it, and we'll give them a heads up to sort of create their strategies on how to get to the legislature to try to defeat it. That's what I believe.
Yeah.
I think we're sort of straying away from how we're going to evaluate
I think
things,
we are too, yeah.
strategy.
Why don't there's a lot of work that needs to be done today. Why don't we tie up this part of this and try on a couple of of these policies, couple of these bills, and see what comes out, and we can go back and refine the criteria as we wade into it.
Yeah, I think the
I think
only
that's
thing
a
that's
good-
not there, I think, is that if we're looking at current policies that are at the legislature, is the likelihood of passage. Because again, if we're considering something that's dead in the water, then it will be a wasted effort.
I think that's a good one. But the other thing, though, I think we should be thinking about is, are there one or two things that we would really like to have as an intermediate jumpstart? So, I mean, I'm in the camp that public option would be great. And
Yeah, Chuck, I was just thinking the same thing. I was wondering if we wanted to have a criteria which was regarding statewide impact or something like that, rather than, some subset impact that just is a smaller piece, but maybe not. But I'm with you on the public option.
it's things that are good to have that now, and also for me, a priority is reducing the level of uninsurance.
I think a piece of that is going to also be how that public option is designed. If it's designed in a way that moves forward, then that would be really attractive.
Right. And then also, are there, and it's maybe related to public option, we've talked about having a sort of separate health trust fund or whatever to avoid kicker problems and whatnot. And so that can get created ahead of time, so that sort of sort of what's the architecture that we need? Is there anything in the architecture we need that the legislature could say, oh yeah, we'll set up this public corporation, we'll call it this, some things to be defined later. But at least buy the plot of land and start the construction.
So Bruce, can I ask a sort of procedural question?
Yeah.
I'm listening to the turn of the last couple of comments, and in one case, I realized that we are reacting to what the state is doing, legislators, bills, policies, work that's being doing. In other case, what I'm hearing is more proactive. Wouldn't that be nice as an intermediate step that, and Chuck throws out a couple of real good ones, putting in some infrastructure in place, and maybe advocating for public option. So process question. Are we looking at both? Are we looking to react? Are we looking to be more proactive as a group? This is an important step that will move us towards there. I always thought that we're going to be reactive, but it just occurred to me that is this group going to be thinking about actual intermediary steps beyond the policy that's being worked on now?
Well, I'll give you my personal opinion. I actually was thinking we would be more proactive than reactive. The reason to look at the bills today was really, I think, just to inform us about what's before the legislature and give us an opportunity to look at those through the lens that we've just been talking about. How do they advance the work? How are they consistent with what we're trying to do or not? How do others feel?
Boy, I would be cautious about, favoring specific legislation. I mean, as I look at, to the degree I have, which isn't a lot, there's certainly legislation out there which has some ideas within it. One of the public option pieces of legislation I've seen has a couple of ideas in it that I think are clearly consistent with where we're going. Now, who knows whether those ideas will survive? And I'm not sure. I think it'd be pretty premature for the task force to say, well, we favor that legislation at this point. Because if those things didn't survive, then I don't think we would, and I'm not sure it's our place to be, kind of saying that. I'd be careful about that. I think it might be good to know which of those pieces of legislation have ideas that we think are of importance, and keep track of whether those ideas survive or not. And let legislators know, that within this idea is a seed that has to grow for what we're doing to eventually work.
So John, I take it you're talking more than you're speaking in favor of being more proactive in developing our own ideas. Then
I'm more comfortable with that.
what do others feel?
Yeah, so I'm a both and. So the likelihood of some of these pieces passing, I think, are pretty good. So that's the context at which I'm saying, if this is going to continue to carry momentum and get out, then we're going to have to deal with it, and we will have had to have sort of incorporated that into our vision, into this intermediary work. So I totally agree with John that we should not be sort of putting our stamp of approval on any piece of legislation. But we do need to monitor just to know what the landscape is looking like as we're building this bridge. But I would like for us to be proactive, because there are going to be lots that don't make it, and there'll be other pieces that aren't in any of the bills that will be essential, like the pot of money that was just discussed, and some other kinds of work that just aren't addressed, and we can't just make that our only lens in terms of the bridge. I mean, the way my job is handling it is that anything that's moving us in that direction, we're supporting. They're not discriminating against one versus the other. Their ideas to just move everything and say, yes, this is an idea, and if folks have ideas, we're going to support them. And then I show up here because this is ultimately what we want to do with 770.
Chuck, Chad?
I like the idea of staying focused on sort of policy ideas and not getting ourselves tied into a piece of legislature that could amend or evolve and get us kind of sucked into it. So I like the idea of staying with the policy ideas.
I think I'm in the both end, because I think, if some bills are moving and we can make them a little bit better or make sure they're more consistent or do more to pursue the 770 goals, we should be involved and be proactive on some stuff. I'm in Bruce camp on that one. I think we should use this opportunity to get some stuff done.
So Bruce, can I jump back in there?
Yeah.
And just for clarity, I too am in your camp. I just wasn't in your camp until it occurred to me that there was another camp. And I looked around. So could Sarah, can you put back up the letter or the what Manning, you'd put some bullets. Yeah, here. To identify intermediate strategies that legislators may consider to promote affordable. Yeah, so when I read that, I originally read that very differently. I read that because my thought was that he was reacting to what he saw around him, or what they saw around them as this group is going to have to deal with legislation that is in play. I didn't read that the way, from a prospective perspective, which I appreciate. Going back to Chuck's idea, about a pot of money and, some other things to kind of grease the skids. We have, I think, an obligation primarily to be proactive, to come up with policy recommendations, to guide future legislation. But I don't think we can ignore and not react to what is happening around us. And as Chuck said, if not, make it a little bit better. So just for clarity, I'm not entrenched in a reactive mode.
So I think that might be a timing question, Ed. It could be there is a time to do that, but maybe not quite yet.
Yeah, so many of the things I've been watching have been introduced in the House. And so Manning's in the Senate. If it gets to the Senate, he could potentially work with the, Deb Patterson in the Health Policy Committee to add some amendments. So there might be that window that's right around the corner. So again, I don't know whether that's not something I've committed us to, but if that's where we're going, that might be the opportunity.
Other thoughts? So what I'm hearing is just to review where we are. I think that we've got agreement about our charge, which is putting forward these policy proposals, that policy options, I would say, that move us in a positive direction towards universal coverage. We've developed some criteria, obviously sort of restating the degree to which these ideas would move us forward, the alignment with and looking at these through an equity and inclusion lens, the potential to implement while we wait, or if for regulatory relief, or if there are regulatory barriers. We talked a little bit about the likelihood of legislative passage and of statewide impact. And what I heard us say was, I heard all of us talk about wanting to be proactive and develop our own proposals, not just simply to weigh in on current proposals, but there was a sentiment for the both and, meaning that to take a look at what current proposals are and see if there's anything there that actually resonates with us and that we can speak about in a positive way that move us forward towards our ultimate goal. Does that make sense in moving forward at this point?
So Bruce, if I were just to look at this first bill under coverage, it advances coverage for certain members of the population. And it would seem that that is a direction, though a small direction, but a step in the right direction. Is that what you're getting at?
I think that's, I was getting at, let's start to, exactly, let's start to look at these and have that discussion. I think, because it's a great concrete example. And on one hand, it adds more people to our current system, which is laudable and necessary. On the other hand, I think it's worthwhile to have the discussion about whether or not it changes our current system in any kind of meaningful way that moves us towards the goals that we're looking at. So let's look at House Bill 2164. I don't know, Sarah, you want to talk a little bit about it, and then we can have a discussion about that?
Hey,
Or is that what we got?
hey, Bruce, that might be me best to jump in on these.
Okay, Oliver, go for it.
Sorry,
I didn't mean to stun Sarah.
No, I know we talked about this. Sorry, let me pull up the list here. So yeah, 2164, I would think about 3352 kind of together. They're very similar bills. I think the overall policy concept here is thinking about coverage expansion. Thanks, Sarah. And it's really, as some of you all know, Oregon continues to think about incremental expansion. I think the good examples most recently are in 2019, the legislature approved Cover All Kids, which is expanding Medicaid eligibility to children regardless of their immigration status. And then they also expanded coverage to COFA residents here in Oregon who were not eligible for Medicaid and were put on the marketplace, and the state pays their portion of the ACA subsidy. So what these two bills here are trying to do are to expand Cover All Kids to Cover All People. So to all Oregon residents who are not currently eligible for Medicaid, that who make less than 138% of the FPL would be eligible for Medicaid due to immigration status. So that's essentially what those two bills are reflecting. It's in a coverage expansion, might be a way to describe it. And then Senate Bill 65, this is more, I guess some of it's coverage because it is moving the coverage expansion program from DCBS over to OHA. But I think the bigger policy question here is consolidated purchasing. So as you think about the 100 and something thousand lives that are currently enrolled on the marketplace coverage, that is moving over to the Oregon Health Authority. They also purchase coverage for PEB, so OEB, so that's probably 400,000 covered lives plus the Medicaid. So you're talking maybe 1.5, 1.6 million. So it's really more about the consolidated purchasing power that the Oregon Health Authority would have.
Purchasing what, Oliver? Just for my.
Yeah, purchasing coverage. So purchasing
from providers.
So so PEB is self-insured. So, and then PEB goes out to the marketplace for beds. And there are others on this group who are much more knowledgeable on this. So if I'm not stating this correctly, responding to your question, let me know. And then purchasing plans on the marketplace. I think part of the question is, how do you think about embedding different design features as you contract out with carriers for this? So I think that's one aspect. So there's a lot of, I think, design considerations here.
So the reason I ask, Oliver, is when you talk about existing carriers, then it causes me to wonder if that isn't sort of moving in the opposite direction vis-a-vis 770. And so I just wanted to understand what we're talking about there. In other words, 770, we're not talking about using, well, we might use some existing carriers, but there might be a lot of carriers which are eliminated.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think the other way I might think about this for a moment would be, you then, with the transition of the marketplace over to the Oregon Health Authority, you do have a state entity that is now purchasing on behalf of, 1.6 million covered lives at that point. So you think about an integrated purchaser would be an example, moving into the path of having a more consolidated single entity purchasing for large number of Oregonians.
So they could purchase from carriers now, but not later, for example.
Potentially.
I guess I would state it as they would start to purchase from carriers with an aligned set of criteria. Again, back to my example about consistent quality standards and perhaps consistent fee schedules and payment methodologies. In my mind, those things would move us forward.
Yeah, I see.
Or do you want to go to the next set of bills? No. Sorry, Bruce.
Let's stay here for a second. And I would, let me sort of press everybody for some thoughts, because these series of bills raise sort of two issues. I would say that the one that tries to consolidate purchasing power does takes a small step toward as an intermediary strategy. I guess I'm a bit conflicted about the coverage piece. I think we have to cover more people, and it would be criminal for us not to. On the other hand, I'm not sure that it moves us meaningfully towards the goals of what we're trying to do in 770, other than putting more people in the boat. And I'm interested in others' thoughts about that, because I'm conflicted. Chuck, if you're talking, you're on mute.
So wouldn't one of the things that do now is that we use estimates on some things like of uncovered people today, and this would help give us data for the ultimate implementation, right? You'd know how many people got added if we did this. So I think it does help move the 770 forward.
All of these bills, Chuck?
Yeah. I don't totally understand the whole purchasing thing, but
One could argue if you get more people covered, you're getting more people. You're moving us towards getting more people towards a system that has the pop is about eligibility, gets more people into it. Obviously, we still it need to change that system to have it be a single payer option, but it does move us forward in that regard.
But it does raise an issue. The more you sort of throw people into the existing structure, the more difficult it might be to get out of that structure later.
Yeah, so me personally, right? I do think that they're all moving things in that direction. And so I am equally conflicted because of what, I guess Bruce's sentiments and what you just raised is that we're going to then take them back out of that broken system. But the contrary point is that otherwise we leave them out of the system with no coverage until we got a better product. And I'm not sure that I want that alternative, particularly since it doesn't relate to me. I don't want to choose for somebody else if they don't get coverage until they get the coverage I think they deserve. Like that can't be the sentiment that carries.
Yeah, there's sort
It's
of a
that old adage about perfection, which I can't quote properly, but yeah, I understand.
But it's not like, I mean, we're not guaranteed the 770's work product is going to get implemented, right?
Right.
So this gets us sort of, I like the bird in the hand one, right? This gets them into the coverage, and
There is a moral imperative to support coverage.
plus the moral imperative, right?
Can I ask, so 2164 and 3352 basically would provide coverage. I'm assuming that coverage would be in the Medicaid system at Medicaid rates, so through the CCOs. And that would be all state funded. There'd be no federal match. Is that correct?
That's correct.
I mean, I think I could argue this would be very consistent where we're heading, because we're headed to all residents are eligible.
Right.
And this would provide some valuable experience figuring that out and figuring out what the costs of that are. And, you know, doing so at Medicaid rates. So from a cost point of view, that would help us. I mean, I'm impressed that those two would be very helpful to a major piece that we would be proposing.
The other thing, John, is that, you know, at least coming out of the provider reimbursement group, we were endorsing the idea of continuation of value-based purchasing, and to the extent that it goes through the CCOs and the CCOs are continuing to move in that direction, it sort of satisfies those intentions.
Yeah.
Well, plus, I would add on to that, John, I thought you were going in this direction, that because it's funded with state funds only, it gets us towards a place where we would want to be, where there's a single fund.
That's right.
And it's just state funds. We're not creating these different pockets of funding. And that's very attractive about this.
Right.
So I was actually going to say that very thing, Bruce, that the narrative that many of us had in our heads, and we may be saying out loud going into this, was, you know, we need a plan that covers everybody in Oregon. We need a plan that doesn't exclude anybody, and we have gaps. We have people who don't have coverage. So in one case, of course, we have the moral imperative, and this is a bird in hand, but that was a imprecise narrative and argument to begin with, because we know that it's not just about, do you have insurance? It's about access. It's about the care you're given, and it's a system where large groups of disadvantaged, underrepresented people are not getting what they need out of the system. So it was an imperfect narrative going into it, saying we need this because people are uncovered. Just as imperfect the argument would be that because these passed, we no longer need 770. Now, to echo what Bruce and John just said, to me, if the thinking behind a state-funded program or a state-funded pool that this expansion would have to rely on, if that thinking has already started, why not bolster that thinking to become that single payer thinking? And now we've started to actually shift the culture towards it's the state that's funding this. So I see that as a good thing. The last argument is I see very much of the CCO structure as and some sort of the local governance of CCOs as being very much part of a plan as we think about benefits, as we think sort of downstream about what individual communities need. I see that the ultimate 770 plan may gravitate towards those sorts of structures, which if more and more of them were in place and bolstered up would make that narrative that much easier. So I see at least those first two bills that we have up as being consistent. At the same time, I gotta say out loud that that initial argument, however precise, is gonna then surface, which is, why do we need 770 if we've got everybody covered?
I think that one of the reasons I'm a little troubled by this whole activity being embedded in 770 is that question. It's sort of curious. And okay.
Well, I would say that, and it gets at some of the discussion, which is that we're not just about, if my understanding of what we're doing in 770 is not simply covering everybody, but it's about creating a different healthcare system that focuses on health, that operates more efficiently,
Right.
that gets at a variety of the inequities that have existed, that moves us towards streamlining the way we pay for care and brings us towards something that's more fiscally sustainable. So, I'm okay with it in that regard, because I think that ultimately the goal of 770 isn't just to cover everybody. It's to create a different system that fixes all that's wrong with our current healthcare system.
Right.
Yeah, and so I totally agree with that. I do think that by using current infrastructure like the CCOs, again, we've got experience, we've got data, we've got structures in place. We've got the health authority who, if we get to 770, may have increased responsibilities, so they get to work it through. I think in terms of the social determinants pieces, you know, CCOs are required to work with the regional health equity folks, right? So they've already got that built into their mandate. And so this would help us to expand out what that looks like. So I think a lot of the pieces in terms of how this may be realized through the CCOs, you know, speak to at least a framework that we can build upon to get to 770 and expand. It's not just starting from scratch.
And it just seems to me that, you know, if you have two states, one has 10% uninsured and one has 20% uninsured, and you're trying to get to a 770 world, the one with the least number of uninsured is going to have an easier job. And so, and I think that's one of the reasons this helps us, that we're spending the money and doing the math of when you're looking at what's the change from the status quo. Now this goes into the status quo, right?
And I mean, if things go well in terms of how we're serving folks who have been marginalized, then the ultimate cost, because they haven't avoided care for the next 3 or 4 years, they've been in care. Hopefully the cost for their care would be less in year 4 than it is now, right?
Right.
So the ultimate price tag, you know, may be moderated a little bit because we've gotten everybody healthier as we're building the ship or building the facility or the plan or the system.
But Chad's point, I think, is well taken. And I think we need to be, you know, again, cautious about just creating, you know, plugging some holes in an otherwise broken system, and of not being seen like that. And I think it points to, and just to reiterate what we talked about before, that these perhaps are, this gets at why we need to, I think, develop a series of more proactive ideas that move us forward towards the goal of 770 in a more meaningful way. And I think we'll get at that in our next meeting, and that this is a good exercise in thinking through some of this and having some discussion amongst ourselves as a group. So why don't we move on to the next the next bills? And Oliver, you want to? Whoop. There we are. No, there we are.
Here we go. All right, so just quickly, and I just, for everyone, Brian and I have not worked on these bills. These were introduced. I don't want you, we're not intimately familiar and we haven't spoken with any of the sponsors on these, so we have as much information as probably you all, but just kind of summarize this. So this one is, I don't, kind of thinking about the conversation I'm hearing you all have. This one really is more about thinking from the premise value-based payment. So how you change how providers are being paid, and that's 2082. And so I think there's kind of three components here, is really thinking about moving from fee-for-service to value-based system, thinking about what are those statewide targets that you would want to see in a system, as well as what's the infrastructure to actually move payers and providers to a value-based system. And I think that's kind of really, this is a payment reform premise policy here that's reflected in 2082. 2081 is thinking about if you were to take PEB and OEB and move that into a value-based payment arrangement as well, a little bit faster than I think what's been currently happening over the last 3 years. So again, this is another example of payment reform for providers, insurers. I think the one thing to call out here is thinking about an integrated, one integrated insurer delivery system model is kind of, I think, the premise here on 2810, which is think about having your behavioral, your oral, as well as your physical health all under a global budget, and having that tied to quality and outcomes. So somewhat of the CCO model, but putting that over into the PEB OEB landscape here. And then the last one I think is at 3094. Again, this is really thinking about contracting, again, paying differently for healthcare, but thinking about trying to that percentage of spend and that annual increase and wanting to control cost, again, with value-based payments. I think that's probably the most glaring or most consistent piece of the reform across these three bills, is paying providers as well as the accountability and outcome.
If I could just kind of comment on I'm not sure how it fits with this, but one of the threads in the provider reimbursement tag had a lot to do with kind of memorializing the current system versus getting the good parts out of the current system, but adding in other groups, particularly behavioral health and other things. And so I don't know, but I sort of worry a little bit that this is memorializing the current CCO system without, and maybe continuing the process of sort of having, for example, behavioral health outside the loop, but maybe I'm mistaken.
I think that may be a fair characterization of those concepts, with maybe the exception of 3094.
And that's sort of the underlying tension I'm having about all this, is that it's not that these aren't additive, it's just there's some aspects of it that are really more memorializing the current. And in 770, we were trying to not do that so much, but to take the strengths of the current and add in other things to make it more broad. So I'm just sort of, I feel some tension about that.
Other thoughts?
Well, I just wanted to pose the question because to my memory, none of the three have had a hearing yet. Do we know if any of these are even going to be moving so that we need to consider them?
The board, to your question, from what I see on OLIS, I have not seen these scheduled for a public hearing.
Yeah, and the deadline's in a week, right?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
I would My reaction to these three would be the opposite of the reaction I just had to the cover all people. You know, I think value-based payment is still somewhat of a minefield. And, you know, it means different things to a lot of people, and there's a lot of skepticism, and we've heard skepticism from outside testimony when it comes up in our discussions. And for myself, I would be uncomfortable, you know, feeling that this effort is consistent with our effort, just because I don't think value-based payment has a consistent definition. I would be wary of that.
And I would totally agree with that, and the fact that it would be a subcommittee, I guess, of the other board, and I don't know who those members are, what their backgrounds or biases are. So to support, you know, a plan that's coming out of there with not knowing a lot about, you know, sort of the constructs of what that might be, I would need to do more research. In terms of the other ones, again, you know, we have a very small group of public employees, very small relative to the rest of it. And so, you know, I would be reluctant to say for other folks what their needs are. And so I just don't know enough about whether the folks who are in PEB and OEB, whether they support these plans and whether either or both of those bills are coming from them. If it had their support, then I would support it. If they don't like it, then I would be reluctant to do something against their will, because again, any plan needs the buy-in of the end users.
And to John's point, I think his point's a good one. If it's still undecided and under discussion on value-based payments and apparently undefined or universally defined, then I think we should hold off on that.
Maybe on the basis that it isn't likely to move forward though, Chuck. Maybe we can just kind of move away from it until such time as it does get scheduled for a hearing, maybe.
And we could wait for a bit. I think, you know, when I look at all these, it gets back to the discussion we had before. I think we've been looking to consolidate the state's purchasing power for, you know, for now it's about 10 years, which makes sense as a pathway towards, you know, universal health care. On the other hand, we really, these bills just kind of nip at the edges of that and really don't consolidate the state's purchasing power in any kind of meaningful way yet. You know, so it seems a bit of a distraction from where we're going. Or certainly, let me rephrase that, not a distraction, but probably doesn't move us forward in the kind of meaningful way we'd like.
Right.
Bruce, do you want to do the last three that were on the?
Yeah.
Sure.
Thanks. Alrighty. So you all have already spoken about House Bill 2010 that is being scheduled for a public hearing. And I'm not going to speak to this. I know there's others from OHA that have worked extensively on the public option with Manat and others. So I think there's questions around this. Definitely want to defer to the agency on because they've got the expertise. 3038 is one that I think you all, if you looked at it, it would require the state to come up with a plan to provide universal coverage. So I think there's a number of similarities in that bill that would reflect similar goals and principles as you see in Senate Bill 770. So I think that's one. It really is coverage for all, quality, cost, controlling the cost of the overall increase year to year, thinking about the affordability considerations. It also specifies eliminating fee for service and moving to other payment methodologies in an all state funded plan. So that's where I see a number of similarities with the 770. And then the last one is the Hope Amendment, which very simple bill. It would enshrine in the Constitution that all Oregonians should have access to clinically effective, cost-effective healthcare. And there's a question of whether or not that would require the state then to ensure healthcare for all Oregonians and what that state obligation would look like. So those are the last three that I think were flagged for this work group.
Well, I would just jump in and, say that the Hope Amendment, and, this was the work of Representative Greenlick, probably is the one piece that is very consistent with what we started with, which was not just operationalizing, but values. And it certainly speaks to the value of what we're doing.
Yeah, Bruce,
Definitely.
I can back that. I was at the same hearing as you and listened to a dozen speakers talk about former legislator. And it is in the spirit of 770 for sure. With this in play, it's the sounding board against which we throw everything. If this were there.
Right.
And while I'm saying out loud, I think, 2010 and 3038 deserve this group's close attention for reasons that have been said earlier. And Oliver, I'm just wondering, 3038, is there, the possibility that 3038 comes up with recommendations that are not consistent with the plan, the 770 plan as it's being approved? I mean, tell us about that a little bit.
That's my today not muted. So good question, Ed. The bill hasn't been scheduled for public hearing yet, so I would want to hear from the bill sponsor. But I think what OHA would be directed to do would have to be closely tied to the specifics of the bill, and I'm not sure that the bill exactly mirrors what the requirements as they're outlined in 770. So there would be, I think, some different ways of designing a state-based funded system relative to what's very specified in 770. I don't know if hopefully that answered your question a little bit.
Yeah. I just sense divergence, which once there's divergence, there's confusion, and it just makes the conversation more challenging, is my point.
Yeah, Ed, you're channeling me. We're right there. That was my concern. If we're getting an extension to continue our work, and if 3038 is taking it completely in-house, then this becomes an academic exercise, right?
Right.
And so and this is a lot of work. If at the end all we have is a piece of paper with my name on it. We need some better assurances that the efforts we're putting through are going to be soberly considered. So yeah, I would have concerns around 3038.
I'm curious about the relationship between this extension and the work that we're talking about today. I wonder if this work actually might sort of move it away from the possibility of an extension, or is that a done deal? I don't really know about that.
So the extension passed. It got the votes it needed, and so it seems to be on its way.
Okay.
And then 3038 hasn't actually been scheduled for hearing yet. So what we're doing is actually, and that doesn't mean that it's not going to stop on the other side. I don't believe it today that it will, but I also don't know about 3038 enough to know who's behind it and whether it has traction or whether it was there and now ours is moving, so it may not. So
yeah,
some of it's just having the right conversations and and watching.
I'm sort of cognizant of Ed's comment about divergence, and it's kind of resonating with me right now, with particularly this 3038.
Other thoughts? Okay,
Well, Bruce, I just wanted to say, I mean, I would, again, think, as you said, SJR 12 is completely consistent. I've been looking at the values in 770, and many of the same words are used in the value statements in 770 that are in the Hope Amendment. So that's very consistent with our work.
And I have to think that 2010 is quite consistent as well, I guess. What do you think, John?
I think it depends. You know, frankly, the last version of this I saw had two very interesting portions to it. One of them basically said that the public option would pay hospitals at a Medicare rate. And the other said that all providers who are currently in CCOs, in Medicare Advantage plans, or in panels taking care of PEB or OWEB would be required to participate in the public option. If those two remain in, that's a very interesting public option. My guess is the fight's going to be about those two pieces. So it's interesting for us to watch. But you know, I think it has a long way to go before I feel it's consistent with where we're going. Because if those come out and, you know, hey, the public option has what happens is the same as happened in Washington. The public option was just told, hey, get the best you can, which was what everybody else got, and the public option had no advantage.
Yeah.
You know, so.
But don't you think we could weigh in and try to make sure those things don't come out?
I don't know whether that would help or not. I'm not, you know, I'm not a political person. I'm not a lobbyist. I'm a policy person, and I don't know whether that would help, Chuck.
Would it help? We have Tim Sweeney on the line who knows a lot about this bill. I'm just wondering if it would be helpful for him to just speak to it for a minute.
Yeah, I would be happy to. Sorry, was somebody else about to say something too?
no, sure. Tim, why don't you give us like a minute or two?
Yeah, happy to. And Dr. Santa was right about the couple provisions, and I'll talk about those and more broadly. There is, I will just say that there's some expectation of amendments, because this is certainly a big, complicated bill. So what the end result looks like is certainly unclear at this point. But what it does, as Dr. Santa said, is it would establish the public option and require CCOs, plans serving PEB and OEB, and plans, health insurance carriers that provide Medicare Advantage plans. It would require any of those plans to offer a public option. And as was said, it requires the providers that are participating in those plans to, it makes it so they cannot decline to participate in a public option. And it also does set a maximum reimbursement rate at 100% of Medicare, with the caveat that if the plan can demonstrate that it's unable to meet network adequacy standards at that rate, they wouldn't have to comply. And so certainly that is a fairly significant way out, and it would present providers, I think, with the potential to leverage their willingness or not to participate to try to increase that rate. It also sets up a few additional standards trying to, I would say, make the public option plan have some of the positive aspects of CCOs that we like. it would require them to provide traditional health worker services. It would require them, or tries to require them, to invest in social determinants of health, and to have value-based payment methodology. One interesting aspect is that it would require the plans to use the Oregon Prescription Drug Purchasing Program, which would be also a pretty substantial change for most plans and how they deliver their pharmacy benefits. And then I guess one more interesting provision in that it would direct DCBS to start implementing, to move towards a state-based platform away from the healthcare.gov platform. Again, all of those provisions could go away. They could get modified. We'll see in the coming weeks what amendments are out there.
Thanks, Tim.
I guess on hearing that, I'm kind of with John. I think it's too early for us to jump into that.
Yeah, listening to this conversation, I would agree. Let me, we're nearing the end of our time, and I think this has been a really good discussion. I think it's appropriate now that we talk a little bit about next steps, and let me try something out. I think that this has been a really, really good discussion. We sort of, we began with our charge. We came to some agreement on some sort of broad criteria to look at proposals. We've looked at these proposals, had some good discussion. I think some aren't going to go anywhere and some might. So we'll continue to follow those in the next couple of meetings. But, to me, what they really pointed out was the need for us to come up with some, I think, more proactive ideas that would hopefully move some things forward. And I would propose that we spend the next meeting not talking about these current proposals, but talking about some ideas to significantly move the goals that we're all looking to reach forward. I know that John Santa had sent me a couple of ideas several weeks ago that would be great to discuss, and I would put on the table that as a next step, if members of this group had some ideas, if they could write a short paragraph, 2, 3, 4 sentences about what their idea is, and we could actually spend the next meeting talking about the ideas and maybe coming to some consensus about what 1 or 2 or 3 we would want to really get behind and push forward. So how does that sound as next steps or some better ideas? I throw it open to the group.
Yeah, no, I love that idea.
Bruce, I'm curious about the sort of calendar that we have and when our work has to be completed and how that sort of plays out over the course of the next 2 months.
Let's flip to the next slide. Perfect timing, Chad. No, this is our timeline.
Okay, thanks. Then if we could tie that to sort of the what that we want to have done in those.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That we can have some ideas and develop then a little bit of a work plan for the next 2 months.
Can you go back to that previous slide? I just want to make sure I have it all correct. Thank you.
And Laurel and Sarah, you'll send these slides out to everybody. So we.
Okay, all right, that'll do. Thanks.
Yeah, and you should have the meetings on your calendar as well. But yes, we will send it out.
I
So
know,
Bruce-
but I'm old school, Sarah. Sometimes I just can't pull it off. So
No,
thanks.
I totally get it.
So Bruce, could you talk a little bit more what you're looking for us in the 3 or 4 sentences? Are you looking for of these already bills and proactive ones?
No, I would say so let me give you an example. You know, we just talked about this, you know, this public option bill, and we talked about these coverage ideas. But perhaps there are, rather than taking some piecemeal things, what are some of your ideas that you could put on paper that would move us towards our goal? So as an example, I would say we heard about 1332 waivers and the individual and small group markets. You know, could something that move us forward be that we get a 1332 waiver for the state where we take all the funds, both state and federal, that are going into the individual and small group markets, add to that what the employers are putting together, create a uniform benefit and fee schedule that would move, you know, several 100,000 people in today's market towards a single way of paying for care with a single fee schedule. That would be perhaps one proposal. Maybe not, might come from me, who knows? Someone might have a proposal about how to cover more people that does it in a way that demonstrably moves us towards the goals of 770. Does that make sense, Chuck?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
Your idea of creating a fund.
Okay, got it. Okay.
And I'm not wedded to this as next steps. I provide that just as background, but you know, I think that we've got 3 more meetings. We've had some good discussions around these bills, but if we're going to spend some time really talking about some ideas that move us forward, I do think we need to get into the arena of being a bit more proactive. Although I entertain some other suggestions.
I think that's a good one. I think everybody's with you.
Well, what I would ask then is that we are meeting again.
6th.
Where's that slide again?
Or the 26th.
The 20. So we're meeting in 2 weeks. So maybe by the end of next week, if you have some ideas. And again, I don't think you need to write 3 pages on this, but just a brief description would be helpful. Ed.
Yeah, Bruce. I don't know what kind of support or time we have from staff, but I'd like to open this up, and I don't know if you are asking for proposals just from the task force members, or if this is staff as well. You know, I feel like, you know, even what I heard from Tim, and that I certainly have blind spots in what it takes to move policy forward. But, you know, I'm wondering if we, you know, start from a place of the tags. And this is what I was thinking. I was thinking, okay, you know, the staff who are aligned with tags have done a lot of thinking, you know, as they've put together, you know, months of tag meetings. They may have stumbled across things that, you know, that they know are going to be important steps. So my first thought is, you know, do we want general categories of proposals as intermediate steps, like the same categories or bins that our tags fall into? And then my second thought is, you know, can we get, you know, any capacity from our current staff who's done some of this work to say, you know, hey, think about this, you know, these couple of items. So that's my question. Is there time available from staff to do something like that?
Oliver, Sarah, Laurel, you think you could,
So I think that we could help consolidate ideas. We can organize them. We can think about how they might fit into what's been discussed in the tags that we've been helping to coordinate. We can think about, you know, key considerations that might need to be pulled out. I'm not sure we're in a position where it's appropriate for us to be generating ideas for consideration for you guys, but we can definitely be helping to round things up and flesh them out and pull out some points that maybe haven't been explicitly addressed yet. Oliver, please correct me if that's not right, but.
I would just chime in. I think it's totally appropriate.
I would
Yeah,
agree.
I thought it was appropriate. I just didn't know if there was time. You know, I see us all as on a team, and you guys have done great work up until now. I've learned so much. I just hate to exclude.
I think I would agree with her, just in terms of, you know, where the appointments lie and where the work really lands. And I don't have any great ideas either. So I agree with you on that part, but I do agree that the staff, you know, should just sort of be the facilitator and not the thought leaders to that extent. I think that's asking them to do what we agreed we would do.
Okay, sounds like you may be off the hook, Sarah and Laurel.
We can talk about this more offline, but.
Yeah. And this is Laurel. I mean, I do think that there may be a handful of places that, as you said, Chair Goldberg, that, or maybe it was Vice Chair Jenkins, that there are ideas that have come up in tag conversations. I have a sneaking suspicion that you all are going to reflect a lot of those. But if they don't come up, I think we could absolutely be kind of chiming in that these were things that we heard from the tags, and offer that, kind of remind you all some of the conversations that I know you've all been a part of.
So if you have some suggestions, you'll bring them forward.
Bruce?
Yeah.
Yeah, if I could just make a comment to the group. You know, I just think we need to appreciate, I mean, we've just seen a $1.9 trillion bill pass in a 50-50 Senate. And that bill was filled with incredible ideas that people have been working on and managed to get to Joe Biden and his staff. You know, who's ever been working with the Black farmers is a miracle worker. They are a miracle worker. And, you know, I think the way the rules work is in each session of Congress, they get 2 budget reconciliation bills. So the Democrats have one more chance this session, this year, for another budget reconciliation bill. And, you know, maybe there's an idea out there that's good enough and crazy enough that Oregon could get that in. I think that to me, but my mom always liked the long shots. It was, you know, it's much more fun to when your 70-1 horse comes in.
John, I like the way you think. And, you know, you had some good ideas, and I think that's what we need to discuss.
Yeah.
This is Laurel. One last thing I just want to say in terms of discussing everything. I think we want to make sure to, in the role that staff are playing here, we want to make sure that we're turning to you kind of for that prioritization of the proposals. And I think that might be some of the any hesitancy that you may have heard from us. I think we want to make sure that we're reflecting your prioritization and not inserting some external prioritization. I just wanted to offer that last note.
Hey, Laurel, you know, one approach might be to kind of cross this Rubicon is for the tag leaders or each of us that are involved in a tag to meet with our staff person, in my case, you, and just kind of talk through a little bit and see if we can maybe together bring some stuff forward.
That's great.
That makes good sense.
And you know, and I think it would be also good if, you know, if Tim weighed in, if there were things related to the public option one or whatever, that so it's not just Laurel and
Right.
So I just wanted to point out that I hear staff wiggling back on the hook. Now that said, you know,
I think we're giving them
my only
freedom.
point, I agree with Deborah that, you know, ultimately, you know, we are in place because, you know, we need to be the ones making the decision. And I just hate to lose the expertise and the thinking that I've seen come out of the staff, however it comes to us, that we have found all of the ideas out there.
That's right.
That was my point.
And I gave them cover. So if they wriggle back on the hook, I did my job, right? My hands are clean.
We appreciate you, Deborah. Yeah, we're of course we're happy to help. I think we can kind of maybe work this a little more offline and have some conversations about what our best role is here.
There's no hierarchy for good ideas. I think that it's, when it comes to prioritization, there's a certain role for the members of the task force. But when it comes to good ideas, I think we're all on the same hook. Okay. Any other thoughts about this?
Bruce, just to double back, when did you envision that there would be a dialogue regarding our role with the larger task force?
Oh, I think that what we'll do is I'm gonna get together with Laurel and Sarah, and we'll put something together.
Okay, I'm not trying to put you on the spot. Just don't want to lose track of. I don't want the task force thinking that we're not working in their interests.
Yeah, no, that
Right.
makes sense. And I think the simplest way is just going to be that let me kind of short circuit things and say the best way to do that is that we have this now as a standing agenda item at our task.
I think that would be a good idea if it was just a little update, you know.
Yeah. So we will do that. We've been working on the agenda for the meeting that's coming up on I believe it's the 25th, and we'll just add this. Thank you for the reminder, Chad. That's great.
Thank you.
Hey Bruce, as we are running out of time, this is a public meeting. Do we have comments?
We, as of 10 minutes ago, we did not.
Okay.
Any update on that, Oliver?
Chair Goldberg, no, we didn't get anyone signed up this afternoon.
Okay. So anything else for the good of the order? Great discussion.
yeah, it's
And,
very good.
you know, I really think I just really appreciated everybody's thoughts and ideas. I love the fact that we're including staff in generating some ideas. And look forward to our next meeting and our next discussion. So more to come. Thanks, everybody. And
Thank-
thanks to staff for all the work. And talk to you soon.
Thanks for setting this up. This is great.
Yeah, thanks for your leadership.
This is
Bert.
terrific.
We're getting there.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
All right. You guys have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Be well.